Hello, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile. This is the show where I get to talk about sports, I get to talk about business, and I get to talk about everything in between. And what a perfect guest to do that. I have Trent Murray. He is a senior writer for the Esports Observer. Trent, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm fantastic. Really excited to be here and chat with you.
Hell yeah, very thankful. Our mutual friend Turner put us in contact. You said, "Hey, I'm looking to get on more podcasts." He said, "Hey, I was just on this awesome podcast the other day," and only a couple days later, here we are. So very excited to talk to Trent about esports, his journey in esports, but specifically the business side of esports, because that's what the Esports Observer does, right? Obviously, also have a pretty sweet partnership with the Sports Business Journal. So some very cool things going on there. But Trent, the first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
I love sports for the storylines. I think there is no place that you can get the drama that comes with sports. You know, Brett Favre after his father passed, those sorts of things. And as we'll talk about, that's the exact same reason that I fell in love with esports, is those same storylines of triumph, of teamwork, of rivalry that don't hit as hard in anything else, are true to life and organic in sports.
It really is. That's why I love it so much too. Like, why do people? And no offense to anyone who does, but why do you watch the Kardashians? Like, we all know it's kind of fake. Like, turn on March Madness. Like, if you have
Yep.
not been watching, this has been absolutely nuts these last couple weekends, and I've been watching every second I can because it's exactly that. It's pure drama. It's live. It's kids messing up. It's adults doing things they should or should not have done, and it just makes it so much more interesting. And as you said, that's kind of what got you into esports. So you and I are only a couple years. I think you're a couple years older than I am. I guess I'm kind of curious, like, where did you find out about that stuff where you were younger, right? Like, me and my friends used to play video games, and now I
Mm-hmm.
find out that technically, because we were competing, yada, 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 we don't need to get into technicalities or anything, but where did you first start to hear and learn and find those stories of drama and intrigue, back when you were maybe just a little bit younger?
So I've been a gamer my whole life. It's the story of anybody that's in esports, is, Super Nintendo, Duck Hunt, all
Let's
the way up
go.
to World of Warcraft in college and those sorts of things. And then come towards the end of college, I got into a game called League of Legends, which is one of the most popular games in the world, one of the biggest esports. And at the time I was just playing it. It was a game that my girlfriend at the time, now wife's brother, played. I wanted to connect with him a little bit more. We started playing. I started looking up guides on how to get better, found a website that actually had a professional team that was competing in tournaments. So I was like, oh, there's tournaments for this. Let me watch some of that and see how they play so that I can get better at the game. And then that team started doing vlogs where they would introduce who they are. They moved together to a team house in New York where they're all living together under one roof as, 20 somethings playing video games all day. And getting to know their stories and their drive to compete a little bit more got me more into that. And then that year, League of Legends had its first ever world championship where teams from North America, Europe, China, Southeast Asia all got together and competed against one another. And it was really incredible to see. I'd only been watching North America, and North America plays this one style, to put it in like football. North America plays a really strong defense, whereas Europe plays through their running back. And it's a style that if you only watch North America, you've never seen this style of football played before. And it completely opens your mind to all these new possibilities that are happening. And Europe took the victory that year with this strategy that no one had any preparation for. And this kid with crazy long hair called Shushay just shocked the world with this strategy that no one had ever seen before. And I was instantly hooked and said, okay, I don't really fully understand what this is, but I know I absolutely have to be a part of it. And from there, I just went full tilt and fought my way into working in esports full time any way that I could.
I love that. And I think it's really important, right, for people to understand, like, I always love connecting dots, kind of seeing how things end up happening, right? And as you said, like, you wanted to connect with your now wife's brother a little bit more. So you just picked up this game that looked kind of cool. And here we are, however many years later, you're writing for one of the most, authoritative figures in all of esports business. It's just crazy how those kind of things happen. And I think, right, like, esports is it's a funny term, right? Like football,
Mhm.
depending on I guess where in the world you are, football is football, and it's always football. And yes, there's different ways to play it, but in esports, it's like, well, what the hell is esports? I mean, are you talking about League of Legends, Dota, Rocket League? Are you talking about Super Smash? Like, what are we talking about? Call of Duty, Fortnite? Like, it's just such a ridiculous. I think it's just like saying like I like sports, right? Like
Yep.
it's so much more difficult. I guess how did you like? When did you so you were into duck hunt like we all were, right? First off, how did duck hunt work back in the day? Did anybody like think about that for a second? You were literally taking a gun, shooting it at your TV, and it was just a giant tube, and it worked every time. Like this was like the 80s, man. Like that was nuts, but that's neither here nor there.
It's all sorcery.
Right. Like sincerely, me and my friends, we kind of got stoned one day and we're like, how does this work? Like, how did that happen back in the day? And that was college. But one of those things, like, how did you, when you started to play like League of Legends and then you started to do like, how did you start to expand just into different games? Because, right, like esports is such a broad term. And now you kind of talk about the whole industry. The industry is gigantic with different publishers and games and all these different things happening. When did you start to like realize like if I want to work in this space, I can't just play League of Legends. I can't just play World of Warcraft. I have to learn about and kind of dip my toes into each of these things.
I think it started out. So you touched on something that I think is really important for anyone coming into esports to understand is esports is the exact same term as sports. It's just with an E in front of it. So just like there's football and hockey and basketball and golf, there's League of Legends and Counter-Strike and Dota and Wild Rift and all of these different titles. And so for the most part, people focus on one game. If you're a football writer, you write about football. Most people aren't a sports writer. They're a football writer. They're a basketball correspondent. And that's how I started in esports was League of Legends. I dove headfirst into League of Legends. I went to any website that would let me put writing up on their website for free until I got some contracts. And I dove deep into League of Legends. I was doing analysis, player interviews, everything like that. And then when the contract started to dry up in League of Legends, I just had to start looking elsewhere for where the opportunities were. And one of the things that I really tried to make myself do in the early days of my career was find what the next game might be. Nice. So rather than going to Counter-Strike, which is a decade-old game that has a lot of established writers in it, I said, okay, well, here's this new game that's coming up. Let me be one of the first writers writing about that. And by chasing those trends, I just sort of very naturally ended up being someone who covers a wide range of the esports space. And what I've learned over time is that just like in sports, those people are fewer and farther between. And so there's a lot more value, especially on the business side. You really have to understand the entire landscape of esports to really effectively cover the business side of it, because even if you know about the biggest games on computer, on PC, that's completely irrelevant if you want to talk about what's going on in India where everyone plays on their phone. And so you have to know about mobile esports. So it just sort of was a very natural progression of, if I want to be in this space and I want to have value and stand out from all the other writers that are trying to fighting me for the same jobs, the best way I can do that is know more about more esports than anyone else, rather than just diving deep into one game.
And with the business side of things, right? Like it is so fast moving, right? Especially over this last year with the pandemic. I'm very excited to get to talk to you about that in a little bit. But even just like when I honestly don't remember the first time I heard the word esports, I remember it being kind of weird and being like, why would you want to pay someone? Like, why would you want to watch someone play video games? And then I was like, well, I watched like 350-pound dudes just hit each other over and over again. And I love that. So who the hell am I to judge? Right. So you do what you want to do. And then for me personally, when I started to notice it the most was, it was that Ninja, Drake, Juju Smith-Schuster. And I just remember seeing Fortnite all over Barstool. And I was just like, what are we doing here? And it looked like fun. I mean, back in college, my buddies played a boatload of Minecraft. Now I don't know kind of where that fits in the gamut of things, but that was always fun watching them just like create stuff. I'm reading a book, looking at my phone or whatever, and then look up. It's like, hey, look, I made Sonic. That's kind of cool. But just kind of like with that aspect of this always being so fast moving and needing to look at different things. I think, Rick, right? You were looking at the trends. You were looking at what game's coming out next to find a way to put yourself ahead of everyone else. And one thing I want to also just kind of touch upon again is you said you were writing for free just to get your name out there, just to put your name out there. You had to make money too, right? Like, I don't know your personal situation or anything, but if you're doing that for free, I hope you then have a full-time job on the side, quote unquote. And I know that you did have a couple of those, let's call them normal people jobs. I'm using air quotes for everyone that's listening. What was that like? Like, kind of like having a side hustle, knowing like, I want to do this, but I have to do this to be able to do, you know, what I want to do for the rest of my life, or for, at least for the foreseeable future. What was that like? And how did you kind of cope with that on the inside, and understanding like the 9 to 5 was the worst part of your day? It's everything else that you're living for.
Well, fortunately, that has sort of been my life forever. You know, I did school and endured school so that I could go home and play video games or play with my friends. I, you know, got through college so that I could play World of Warcraft. You know, most of us, that if you were not in a job that we love, are getting through the day to do the thing that we like, and are, you know, we have our hobbies, we have our pastimes, we have our friends or our family. That is, you know, where we derive our joy from. And not all of us are lucky enough to be in a job that, you know, fulfills our creative needs or our emotional needs the same way that a passion does. And so for me, that I just sort of took a lot of that into esports. And this is something that everyone will tell you: the more you work in gaming, the less time you have to play video games. And that was basically what happened. Is my video game playing time became video game watching and analyzing time and writing time. So all of my hobby time and my lunch breaks and my in-betweens of work and my Saturday afternoons and my Sunday afternoons became putting my laptop on the table with a notebook to write about what was happening in this League of Legends tournament. And full credit to my very understanding wife, who did not agree to marry someone chasing an esports dream, but rolled with it all the way through. And I think that's the only reason I was able to do it. Was I knew instantly that this was what I wanted to do, and that had never happened to me. You know, I was 22 and knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life was esports. And I think for anybody that's had that crystallizing moment at any point in their life, it becomes very easy to make the time for something that you want to do.
24 hours in a day, man, just matters how we all use them, right? And I think that part is very important. And right, like we've all been kind of stuck at home, for lack of a better term, for the last I don't know, let's call it year and change. If you didn't start figuring out what you wanted to do, or if you didn't try to figure out something to do, you kind of missed the boat, I think, because it seems like things are starting to get closer to normal. Crossing my fingers, really, just kind of hoping to speak that one into existence. We'll see what happens. But with the opportunity, as you said, you know, you were putting out free content, you were doing whatever you could, making all these connections, but unfortunately you weren't able to play video games anymore. And it's kind of funny whenever I speak with people in, you know, just the quote unquote normal sports industry. That's something that people always say too, right? It's, you know, I'm a huge Giants fan, but I had to go work for the Eagles because it was there. And I don't really hate the Eagles as much as I did anymore, because I know all the people and I know all the players, and turns out they're good people. I just hate them because they're rivals. And what was that aspect like, Rick? Right? You wanted to work in esports because you loved playing video games so much. And then that was kind of, the love of it was taken away, but you still had this desire to work in this community. What is it about that community? What is it about esports that held you on even when you weren't able to do the thing you loved as much as you were doing prior?
I think what I learned about myself was that really what I love most of all is learning. And which is funny because I was atrocious at school. I hated school. And maybe that's a different conversation for a different podcast about education and how we do things. But I love learning. I love learning new systems. I love learning new vernacular and these sorts of things. And what esports really allows you to do, and what gaming in general does for you, is video games are just education on how to solve a unique problem. You know, Mario's princess got captured, and you can only save her by jumping over this thing and jumping on a turtle. And you've got to learn how to do that properly. Now you have to do that in water. Now you have to do that while there's a fire stick going around in front of you. And you get to iterate on that process over and over again. And that's really what the fun of video games are, is something's going wrong and you are in a safe space to iterate on solving that problem. And so what esports is that cranked up to 11, where every couple of months there's a brand new game that comes out that now I have to learn the systems in that game, the relevant players that are going to be involved in that game, where it fits in the landscape of esports. And then I've got to learn all the vernacular. I've got to learn what, a quarter circle forward Hadouken means for a fighting game. And then I've got to also learn what a B rush bomb site means for Counter-Strike, and all of these different terminologies. It's literally like learning a new language. But someone pays me to do it now.
Nice.
So it's, that I think is what really, rather than losing out on getting to play video games in favor of having to write about them, I just got to learn differently, and both are equally fun for me.
Getting to write about them, because many people would kill to have that job. And what was it like when you first, like, as you said, you did stuff for free and then you started to get some contracts? How cool was it just getting that paycheck, being like, hey, Trent, we'd like to give you money to do this thing you really like to do? How cool is that?
It's incredible. I think anybody that's been able to turn a passion into a business can speak to really what that first, $50 isn't going to pay your health insurance, but man, is it incredible when the first person says the work that you were willing to do for free, no, we think that actually has monetary value. We think that you are worth putting investment into, regardless of how much it is. There's really not any experience like it.
I think it's fantastic. And did you kind of, you're writing for other sites, but were you writing for like your own blog? Did you have anything personal that you were kind of building, either upfront, in the background, anywhere that it's somewhere like, hey, I have stuff here, here, and here, but also here's just a collection of my work sitting on this website that I created?
Yeah, absolutely. I had my own blog for the last several years before I got hired full-time at the Esports Observer. Before that, I actually thought I wanted to be an esports coach. So a lot of my time, I was writing to get some extra money and be paid to be in esports. But really where my passion was trying to be a coach and work with teams. So for the first several years, I wasn't doing as much of, creating my own work that I probably should have been. But then once I realized that coaching really wasn't the opportunity for me, I launched my own blog and made sure to, at least 3 to 4 times a week, I had content going up on my own site in addition to seeking out freelance opportunities.
I love that. And then, so talk to me, man. You get hired April 2018, if I'm not mistaken, by the Esports Observer. As you said, you were really paying attention more to interviews and analysis and strategy of these games. The Esports Observer really pays more attention to the business side. How did those initial first conversations go? Like, we were like, hey, like, I want to write. And they're like, well, you write about analysis and how did you get that opportunity to be hired? Obviously you put the work in for multiple years, but it wasn't quite in that same vein, I guess. So what were those initial conversations like?
So part of the fortunate thing for me is that there really aren't any business analysts in esports, or at least there weren't when I got started. It's the reality of esports as a whole. This is a passion fueled industry from top to bottom. The only reason that esports exists is because a bunch of college age students were passionate enough about StarCraft to put together tournaments at a loss in a hotel ballroom, and now millionaires are paying attention to it. So the same thing happened in journalism. There weren't, people didn't go to college to be esports journalists. There are some students now doing that, and there are people that have gone back to school to learn journalism, but there really weren't, people with a decade of experience as a finance reporter that were working in the esports space. And so we've all kind of had to learn on the job, and the Esports Observer recognized that, and something I think we've done before I joined and since is recognize the importance of on-the-job training. And that's really, I got a crash course in business writing and had about 37 tabs up the first time I had to write about somebody's earnings report, Googling terms and everything, and really educating myself on the job, which fortunately is something that I really enjoy doing. And you can't, because of the way that esports works, you can't fully ignore the business side of it, because sustainability is so important. Who's paying for the prize money? Who's supporting esports? How big a deal is it that Nissan has come in? It's very different from an established business where these sponsorship deals are just a transaction. What a lot of the esports community views a brand deal like BMW partnering with 5 different esports teams, it's recognition, because gaming for so long was this ostracized thing. And all of us that are, older than 15 remember when it wasn't cool to play video games. And so every single one of these deals is really a recognition that the thing that we've loved and got picked on for so long has value now. So even when you're writing about in-game tournaments and things, you can't help but recognize the importance of these business deals that are happening. So even as I was focused more on that side, I was aware of a lot of the business things that were going on and a lot of the opportunities that were being presented on that side.
Right. And because if money is injected into something, more opportunities come, more marketing dollars are there, more people can see it. I also just want to say I'm a very big StarCraft fan. Back in the day, I know all the cheat codes, so I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. That was a lot of fun. I was like 10, so
Yep.
I'm sorry I wasn't that great at StarCraft, but it was a blast. And it was almost so much fun. And I think the business side of esports is just so interesting to me, right? Because it is so fast moving, it's so fast paced, and as you said, now all these millionaires are seeing is like, wait a second, how many eyeballs? What's a Twitch? A concurrent view? Those things sound interesting. Let me learn about those. And then they're finding out how many people are actually watching some of these events. And now we're starting to see companies, my friends over at eFuse, they're doing some really cool stuff. And they just had all these athletes just inject millions of dollars into what they're doing because it's pretty cool. And so seeing these startups, these teams, these colleges all start to come together and gain more and more popularity, recognition, and money. What was that like when you started in 2018, right? As you said, there really weren't any business analysts in the esports space. What was it like to now see, 3 years later, also congratulations, 3-year anniversary coming up. What was that like 3 years later now, kind of comparing what 2018 April looked like to 2021 April is going to look like, and how much has just the business aspect and the people in it, how much has that grown?
It's astronomical. You mentioned it. The crystallizing moment for a lot of people was 2 things. It was the Ninja Fortnite with Drake that made everyone aware of gaming and that this is something that we need to be paying attention to.
Drake likes it, so do I, right?
Yeah, if Drake likes it, then there must be something we need to understand about this. And then it was the Fortnite World Championship. And a 16-year-old kid wins $3 million in a $30 million tournament that is watched by so many people. We need to be aware of what's going on here. He goes on, Jimmy Fallon, and just the awareness of competitive gaming blows up in a year compared to where it was. And the industry's been steadily growing for 2 decades. And League of Legends played an important role earlier on in really kind of formalizing the modern era of esports. But it really was Fortnite that created this sudden surge of awareness from the outside. And then you had opportunities like the Overwatch League that allowed these big investors to put money in that grabbed headlines. And it's just continued to snowball from there, with bigger and bigger brands coming in, recognizing the value of the space, renewing deals after they've dipped their toe in. So I think for those of us that have loved gaming forever, that saw the League of Legends World Championship a decade ago and recognized that there was something special here, that foresaw, the ESPN of esports becoming something that could be a reality. This is all well within our expected parameters for what the industry should be like. But it just continues to evolve so quickly, and things can change so fast that there's no way to know, even a month from now, what the next monumental shift is going to be. And that's what I think makes it such an exciting space to really be invested in.
And it is exciting to say the least, right? And I have a friend of mine, Reed Trimble, shout out Reed. He's an awesome dude. And I always just, like, every couple months, I just reach out to him, because it seems like every 3 to 4 months, like, oh, it's like, yeah, the whole thing's been turned on its head. Everything's completely different now. And now we're doing all this stuff. It's like how do you keep this shit straight at some point? But I'm always interested, right? Because now there's these, you were talking about that League of Legends house, and now, we have the FaZe Clan house, like all these like different teams. So now if you could give the people, and honestly myself, a little bit of a crash course, right? Like, so we have these teams, and sometimes they're competitive, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're there to create content, and sometimes they're not. And then now we have like the Call of Duty League and the Overwatch League, which are now technically based in cities. So it's like the Toronto whatevers and the Minnesota Rockers and all these different things, which is really interesting. And I've heard both sides of the coins. Like, well, it's cool because these billionaires that own football teams are like, well, that means we have to have an esports team here, right? Because I'm in Boston, you're in Boston, and now we're going to root for the team in Boston. And then it's like, well, who cares? We grew up on the internet. I can watch those kids over in Japan as much as I can watch the kids in California, and I live here in New York. So who the hell cares? So I guess just from that aspect of it, again, over the last 3 years, because I think it's a really interesting conversation we're having here with Trent Murray of like the business aspect. Why is that all starting to happen now? And what have you seen in the background of positives and negatives from let's have physical locations, let's not have physical locations, let's have everything online, let's have these tournaments? Like, what the hell is going on in terms of the professional scene? And what do you think is going to happen next, I guess?
Yeah, so there are as many different models for professional esports as there are games that are played professionally. So the Overwatch League and the Call of Duty League have established these centrally located city-based teams as a mirror to traditional sports. There's the League of Legends Pro Leagues where all of the teams don't represent anything other than themselves and they all compete. So like the North American League of Legends League, everybody's in California. They head to the studio when we're not in a pandemic. They play on stage. They go back to their offices and practice and come back at the end of the week. And then they travel to China or wherever for the World Championship at the end of the year. And then you have things like fighting games that are a circuit where, there's a tournament that will pop up this month and then they'll disappear for a month and a half and then they'll come back together at another big tournament in another city. So and a lot of that is similar to traditional sports. You have the tennis and golf circuits, you have the National Football League, you have the World Cup. All of those sorts of different ecosystems are mirrored in esports. And nobody has really figured out what the correct model is. And I don't think there will be a correct model. Just like we said, it's not esports as this one giant glob of content. Each game is its own thing. I think the different fan bases and the different ways that each game works requires its own unique infrastructure for the best way for that game to function. What I will say is that I think the one thing that the Overwatch League and Call of Duty League have done that I don't think a lot of people in esports were expecting, whether or not they succeed as leagues and get enough viewership and sponsorship revenue to sustain as leagues in terms of profit, there is a barrier to a new viewer acquisition that is reduced by connecting it to a city. If you live in Houston and you have never touched Overwatch and you could not care less about Overwatch, if Houston wins the Overwatch World Championship, you're like, heck yeah, go Houston.
Let's go Houston. Yep.
Yeah. If you find out that San Francisco has won the last 2 years in a row, let's go San Francisco. I'm a San Francisco fan. Let's check this out. Maybe me and my buddies will go to a San Francisco Shock match for something to do because it's probably going to be cheaper than, getting basketball tickets. And, it's something unique to do that we've never experienced before, but go San Francisco. Oh, and they're up against, X team that we don't like in another sport. There's a very easy connection point for someone that's not invested in esports that you don't have in any of the other games. But I think conversely, what esports has done a terrible job of over the last decade is telling people why they should care outside of that. Because the storylines in esports are as compelling as anything that you've seen in traditional sports. If we could talk about, one or two storylines and I can just tell you the story and we pretend that it's not about an esports team, it's a Hollywood movie that you would pay to see. And you would think that it's about, it's on par with Rudy and you're going to be crying at the end.
Rudy was offsides, by the way. Just gonna throw that out there. So tell me when. I mean, I read the article, so I'll make sure to put it in the link to the show notes so everyone could check it out. Trent actually did. He wrote a piece on 5 esports storylines that should be turned into movies. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me, what was your favorite one?
Yeah. So the greatest story in esports right now is the story of OG Esports, which is a Dota 2 team. And so again, removing esports from it, you've got this team of 5 people, these 2 friends that started a team together because they've been on teams, they've been opponents for years, decided that, you know what, we want to play together and we want to win together. So we're going to form our own team, not with sponsors, not with investors. We're not going to wait to get signed by anyone else. We're going to make our own team and we're going to be together forever. And we're going to grind our way to the championship and be the best team in the world because of the power of our bond together. And they fight together for a long time. They try to sign other players. They just can't quite get there, but they're committed to each other. You know, they're pursuing this dream forged in the bonds of their friendship. And then, you know, the Yankees of esports comes calling to one of them and says, hey, you've been trying this thing on your own forever. Here's a whole lot of money. Come play for us. We value you. We recognize you. And he and one of the other players leave months before the biggest tournament of the year, take the talent away from the team. The team now doesn't have enough players to qualify for this tournament. And they say, and you know, the one guy that's left on the team says, no, I'm pursuing this dream. I set out to be a champion with my own team, believing in my own process. I'm going to do it. And he finds a kid from a Norwegian country, from a country in Northern Europe that has just been playing alone in his basement, has never played on a team before, but he's got incredible talent, says, come play with me. His coach, who hasn't played a professional match in a long time, comes off the bench to take one of the empty spots on the team. And
this is incredible.
They go on to that year not only defeat the team that signed away 2 of their best players, but win the entire championship and win $30 million, a $30 million prize pool. Each of them takes home $3 million by themselves. And then they come back the next year and win it again.
That is amazing. I love it.
You can't, it's why we love sports. You can't make up these stories. And, you know, again, it's the power, the quote that's said when they win is my favorite thing in all of esports broadcasting. OG Esports has won the international through the power of flowers and friendship. And it's, you know, that's the subheading of your movie.
Yep.
And that's the thing that I think we haven't communicated enough to an average audience is somebody that doesn't care about sports is still going to watch the Super Bowl because it's the Super Bowl, and they're going to understand the storyline of Tom Brady having defending his legacy or securing his legacy as the greatest quarterback of all time. Even if you don't follow football, that's a compelling story to be told. It matters who wins this game for more than just what the score says at the end of the game. And I think a lot of those storylines in esports translate very well to a casual audience. And we just need to do a better job of conveying them to that audience.
Yeah, that's the drama of it, right? That's half the reason why we watch. It's the storylines, it's everything that's happening. And that, my friend, that has like NBA trade deadline written all over it. Like that kind of ridiculous. Man, that is fantastic. Shout out OG for taking it home. I hope they gave their other friend a middle finger too, because that is just so fantastic on that front. And I think, right, it's very important for people to understand, like, it's just sports, man. Like that's all this is. Like it's all the same thing. They're just playing a different game, literally.
Exactly.
And I think the more people start to learn and understand that, the more the younger generations start to get older, right? Like I've played video games my entire life, essentially. All my friends played video games their entire lives. It's just something that it's not that weird to us. Now, our parents, like my parents gave me my first, Nintendo. I had an NES that was my mom's, right? And then it broke, and then we got a Super Nintendo. So I watch every YouTube video on Mortal Kombat that I can, because that was like the first video game I ever played. And it's the first one sucked, right? Like it was terrible. And now you see what they've been able to do over the years and everything that's happening. And this movie that's coming out in a couple of days, like I'm the only person I know that I was like, I cannot wait to see this movie, Because I've paid attention to Mortal Kombat since I was like 5. It's been something that I've loved and paid attention to and kept up. I haven't played every game, but I've kept up with all of it. I'm terrible at it. I love the lore and everything behind it. And I know that's not esports, but it's just something like that is like so much easier for me to convey and talk about than it was for my parents to convey and talk about, because they didn't really care about it. It was Super Mario World, and that's about it, right? Like it was Donkey Kong, and it was arcade games, and those were fun, but there's no story. There's not as much compelling, drama to it. And I think that part makes it a lot easier. And the more you and I and the younger generation, and eventually our kids start to it'll just be commonplace, right? It's just something that's there. And one thing that I think is really interesting is, video games always, what's the trope? It's like a bunch of 15-year-old dudes sitting in a basement eating Doritos, drinking Mountain Dew, when in reality, we know these esports athletes, these athletes are like specimens, right? Like they are on a grind, but they have to be very well trained, and they have to be healthy, and they have to pay attention to recovery, just like regular athletes. And how have you seen that, especially on the business side? Like, because I actually just had this argument the other day with some of my friends is, the athletes of yesteryear were a joke compared to just like the median athlete of today, just because we know more about science and health and recovery and working out. How have you seen that just aspect of esports grow over the last couple of years? Because the better those athletes become, the more people will watch, the more money will eventually get injected into all of these sports.
Absolutely. And that is a natural evolution that we've seen in esports as well. You can, if you're still stuck in that mindset of, the South Park World of Warcraft episode and what those kids looked like grinding, I'd encourage you to Google two names, Gingy and Sko from World of Warcraft, who can bench press you and I combined. There are the stereotype of the gamer is not the competitive gamer. Nearly every esports training facility today has a gym, has a full-time professional chef that is working on nutrition with the team. Most teams, in addition to those, have conditioning coaches or workout routines that they expect their players to go through. They also have mental conditioning coaching and consulting. A lot of teams have performance coaches. There was a Counter-Strike Dynasty that there was a really good documentary that they put together that basically showed this team had a lot of talent but couldn't put it together until they got a mental health wellness coach, and then they won back to back because their mental game had got right. And then you look at this, it's the same thing as with chess. They've done studies that show that you actually burn a lot of calories if you're playing high level chess because your brain is working so hard. And then you take the mental game of chess, combine it with the reflexes needed to play a fighting game or a shooter or something like that. And the amount of mental energy that players are expending in a 15-hour grind session of a tournament or of a practice session, these are highly skilled, serious competitors that need to take care of their bodies. They're not, their sleep schedule may be from 4 a.m. until 1 p.m., but then they're getting up and going to work. So yeah.
And when did that change? Like at what point? When did someone kind of come in and be like, "Hey guys, like, let's figure some of this stuff out. We're not just playing video games," right? Like when was that kind of put into the esports landscape of we have to really start to pay attention to that stuff? Because I agree that South Park episode is hilarious, but it's obviously very not true. When did that change, and when did you, at least from your experience, see that and really see that flip, the switch flip?
It's been fairly recent. I think a lot of it has been as more investment has come into the space. You need to protect your assets. Winning remains the most important thing to do. Without franchising in a lot of these games, if you aren't winning, you're not relevant, and you might be kicked out of the league. And we don't have a lot of the protections in place for a team that is no longer relevant competitively to remain, generating revenue. So it is extremely important that you win. And some of that protection has improved recently, but over the last 5 years, as the need to win in order to protect your investment grew, the need to invest more into allowing your players to win became a reality. And it's like anything else. There's always a copycat aspect to it. If someone's successful doing something, everyone else will start doing it. Gaming houses weren't a thing, and then the team in League of Legends moved to New York, won every tournament in North America for 6 months, and suddenly every North American team is in a gaming house. They move to practice facilities. One team has a practice facility, they win, everybody has practice facilities. You get a mental health coach, you win, everybody has a mental health coach. So there's been a very natural sort of evolution of that, both to retain your players and to protect your investment by keeping up with the competitive advantages that other teams have.
And you bring up that word investment a couple times because, right, there's a lot of money involved in esports, especially now. What, like, in terms of the pro teams and everything, like, is it difficult to find revenue? Like, how does that aspect work? Talk to me a little bit about like sponsorship and finding investors. Like you said, that one team, OG, they're just like, no, we're going to do this on our own. And then they all walk away with $3 million. Shout out that team. But like, how is it, I guess, what's like the normal, again, I keep using normal, I apologize, I don't know what a better word to use. What's like the normal life cycle of one of these teams, and to come together, to find investors, find sponsorship, start to do things, stream? Like, what does that look like on the professional level? Take out streaming for a second, because I actually want to separate that into another conversation. But what is that aspect like for these teams to like go and find all these resources and revenue when it's just a bunch of dudes that are really, really great at playing video games?
A lot of that honestly has flipped now, to where it used to be, and a number of the biggest teams today were started by some guy that won a bunch of prize money, put that into making a company, found sponsors, found advertising revenue, found investors, and those sorts of things. But as more investors have come into the space through things like the Overwatch League, which nobody had, it was reported to be like $25 million to buy into the Overwatch League. There's no dude playing, even OG doesn't have $25 million sitting around from winning prize money to be able to pay for an Overwatch League spot. So that requires you to have outside investors, the Kraft family or something like that. And then those investors are hiring general managers who are then putting together a team. So the norm now really is you've got an esports organization or a company, and then you sign players to that company that then compete in whatever games that you want to compete in. And that generates then interest in your organization, which is where you get your sponsorship revenue. Or if you're in a league that has some sort of profit sharing through media rights or sponsorships, there can be revenue generated that way, different partnerships and things. And that's actually where I think you mentioned wanting to separate the streamer part of it. Part of the challenge with esports is you really can't. And that's been a conversation at the Esports Observer that we've had over the last 3 years, has been how much, Ninja streaming with Drake, that's not esports, but it did so much for the esports industry. We've got to cover it. And by the same token, every single relevant esports organization isn't just a collection of competitive teams. They also have streamers signed to their teams, because what they really need are eyeballs and engagement numbers and followers on their social media channels to be able to translate that into value for sponsors. And you're getting that through your esports team that competes, but you're also going to get that by putting, Red Bull's logo on a big streamer that streams to 20,000 people every day.
Yeah. And again, I wanted to separate it because kind of the understanding is that Ninja is esports, but in reality, he's not really esports, right? He's a streamer, and there is like a little bit of nuance there for someone outside of the industry. For you, it's obviously two different things, but for someone that's just kind of seeing it, it's just like, oh, Ninja, he's esports. He plays Fortnite and beats people. Like, that's funny, but that's technically not esports, right?
It's a very murky line, and I think you could spend 4 hours talking about what is and isn't esports, because is speed running. If I'm just sitting in my bedroom competing for the world record in Super Mario 64, am I esports? Well, now if I compete against somebody else, am I esports?
I just watched one of those like literally yesterday. The just Super Mario World speed run. It's like 9
It breaks your brain in half, doesn't it?
It's insane. Like, it's like, why can't I be that good? All he's doing is jumping at the right time, but in reality, it's not even. He
has made that jump about 700,000 times,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
why he's that good at it. And if if you're watching this and you haven't played video games since the Super Nintendo days, go Google some speed runs of your favorite games and just have your brain broken,
It's
because
bonkers,
it's
dude.
completely insane.
It's
But
so
that
much fun.
is really what we're learning, and what esports companies are learning is that competitive gaming is just another entertainment vehicle. We're not really only competing with sports or anything else. We're competing with Netflix. We're competing with everything. And the Netflix CEO recognized that Fortnite is part of their competition. It's all, the gaming industry has so many different segments to it that are so directly linked with one another. You can't have a successful esport if the game doesn't sell. So games revenue, the games industry, the profitability of Activision Blizzard affects the sustainability of the Overwatch League, affects what the next big esport is going to be. So these different segments of the industry are actually so closely intertwined with one another that it's actually very difficult to separate and say, this is esports, this isn't esports, because at the end of the day, if you want to make money in this space, you have to care about streaming. You have to care about the success of video games themselves. You have to care about product integrations. You have to care about all of these different things. And that's why one of the challenges we have at the Esports Observer is making those distinctions of what is and isn't esports.
Yeah, it's essentially, it's as you put it, it's like essentially all under the same umbrella, right? Like there are different pieces and they're not all exactly the same, but they all kind of are driving to this one point of let's have people have more fun doing this, right? Let people can make money, they can have fun, they can do interesting things, and all of these things are going to contribute. It's like a sweet Venn diagram, I think. A couple different circles, and we're right in the middle, and just kind of that is what you guys essentially are paying attention to, especially on the business side. Also, we should reach out to Netflix about that movie. I feel like they would greenlight that pretty darn quick. So if you haven't already, please, Trent, let me be the first person to tell you. Put that down on a piece of paper, send it to them. They practically greenlight everything at this point. So a couple more questions here, talking with Trent Murray of the Esports Observer, senior writer at the Esports Observer. So we talked about investors a little bit. And as you said, like to create a team, right? To create a team, the barrier to entry seems like millions and millions and millions of dollars. And then someone like Activision Blizzard decides, well, let's make a league and let's have people pay us an exorbitant amount of money to be a part of it because it's super hot right now. And people like Robert Kraft have $25 million that if he knew it wasn't there, it wouldn't change his day at all. Right. And so how have you seen that aspect of it? Because, right, it's not, the NFL doesn't own all the footballs. Activision Blizzard owns the game, so they can say what can and cannot be done. And that adds like a weird, different layer to all of this that I think people don't really realize. It's like, no, if there's a Call of Duty tournament, they know about it. And like, they're going to care about it and they're going to pay attention and they're going to make sure it's done essentially the way they want it to be done. There's a football game. The NFL's not coming to be like, guys, that was very clearly offside. You can't do that. So from your perspective of these publishers now kind of adding that extra layer where then they can say is like, oh no, we need $25 million for you to be a part of this. That kind of throws a whole nother wrench into this thing. How have you, what is your thoughts and what have you seen, especially on the back end, kind of behind the scenes, how that's been affecting the landscape a little bit more? Because if we're starting to inject billionaires into this thing, they're then going to have a lot of power and they're going to almost have it done the way they want it done because, of course, it's all about money. So what have you seen on that end and what are some of the positives and negatives that you see from something like that happening?
The Overwatch and Call of Duty leagues are definitely an outlier at this point. We have not seen that level of engagement in any other esport, and the sustainability of the, it's going to be 5 years before we know if that worked or not. So if that becomes the new normal, then we have a very different conversation about those sorts of things. But it is forever the biggest challenge in esports is always going to be the fact that the guy who makes the game owns the footballs. You cannot play a pickup game. You can't at your local rec center organize League of Legends without their permission because they own the rights to the game. And that creates a very different landscape for every game based on how that publisher approaches it. For Overwatch, Activision Blizzard decided to take a very tightly controlled and basically eliminated your ability to create anything in the Overwatch ecosystem at a high competitive level that is not in their tightly controlled, high investor activity model.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you have something like Street Fighter, where you're not going to just go make a tournament, and Capcom kind of doesn't really care. And so it informs what your business strategy is, what games you go into. As you know, if you and I had $1 million sitting around and wanted to start an esports team, we're not starting an Overwatch team because we can't buy into that league. We could go start a Counter-Strike team tomorrow, and if we go steal all of the best players, we could be the best Counter-Strike team and nobody can say anything about it. So it really, the relationship with the publisher drastically changes what the opportunities in that game are, and the attitude of the publisher is extremely important to the viability of those esports. What I think a lot of publishers are learning now, because the entire ecosystem of content creation around video games is so new, that you have some companies like Nintendo that say, you're showing footage of Mario, we're going to sue you for everything that you have. And then you have companies that don't care, that you can make whatever you want with the assets from our game, because it's engagement. People now are talking about our game. That's free publicity that we didn't have to do anything for. And those conversations, I think, are just now starting to be had with esports of, if I'm a game publisher, what is the most valuable use of my resources? Is it tightly controlling our esport and trying to generate a profit from it? Or is it pushing this ship off into the river and letting it flow where it's going to go without us having to spend any of our resources? And all these other companies, all these other passionate people are going to make this esport happen, whether we do anything with it or not. And we're going to benefit from all of that extra publicity and attention on our game from a marketing perspective.
And I feel like the latter, that was very much what it seems like, at least from my perspective, what Fortnite did, right? It was just all the user-generated content you can, and then everybody wanted to play it. And then anytime you got a victory royale, like especially for that like 6-month period, people were just going absolutely bonkers, right, on the internet. And it's not quite the same as it was, but it seems like that was more of the Fortnite thing. And I think one thing that helps, especially with user-generated content, right, is this pandemic we're in. People are kind of just stuck at home. They don't have too much, so they either dusted off their old Xbox, started playing Skyrim again, like myself, right? Like doing these things that I used to do, but now I can't really leave my house like any day of the week. It's obviously, we've figured out and are a little bit smarter about it now, but what have you seen, especially on the business side, especially on the business end of esports? How has this propelled even further into the mainstream, even further into dollars? Because, right, like one of the first things I remember doing was, I'm going to download Twitch, and I don't have baseball. And apparently people are playing, MLB The Show or whatever the hell the game was. So I watched that for like a week, Trent. And wow, I watched a lot of MLB The Show because I couldn't watch real baseball. And then there was the, the NBA 2K League, which is much more structured, right? They had all their competitions and I watched all of them, and they even had it on ESPN, which was pretty bad, but I still watched it because I had nothing else to watch. As a sports fan, I think it opened up the door, especially those first few months, to people that weren't used to or never really paid attention to it. That's when I downloaded Twitch. Like that's how I got into it, right? And then you saw, Big Cat from Barstool, he played NCAA 2014 and had like 150,000 people watching him, and Patrick Mahomes was tweeting about it, and all these actual athletes are paying attention to it, right? So like what have you seen in terms of the pandemic, especially those first few months and over the last year? How has that risen, not totally sure the correct term, the profile of esports and just gaming in general?
I think the biggest thing that the pandemic did was it removed that conversation of, why would you want to watch someone play a video game? Because now we've all done it. We see the viewership spikes for Twitch. We see gaming on ESPN, everyone trying to find some way to create engaging content, and gaming was sitting right there for them to do that through. We saw politicians leverage it for the election. We saw so many different ways that Twitch and gaming content became part of the cultural zeitgeist. And so since then, I have not had to have that initial conversation anymore. So I think we've moved one step further of the barrier to the average person being broken, because, a soccer mom now probably knows who Ninja is because her kid doesn't talk about Brad Pitt or whoever the celebrity. I don't know celebrities. I can tell you all about esports celebrities and Twitch celebrities. Can't tell you about actors anymore. So we're going to say Brad Pitt. That kid doesn't know who Brad Pitt is, but he knows who Ninja is. He watches Mizkif every single day, and Mizkif is his favorite person. If he saw Brad Pitt and Mizkif in a room, he would run to Mizkif immediately and would ask Brad Pitt where the chips are. So that level of that conversation has completely shifted to, we get that watching Twitch is interesting. We understand that these are the next generation celebrities. And now we understand that if we want to reach that generation, we have to go where they are because they're not coming back to us. Mm-hmm. And that's what the pandemic has done with everything. Nobody's going back to working from an office 5 days a week if they have any negotiating power in their job because they've proven they can do their job remotely. Nobody's going back to TV that found Twitch and fell in love with it and likes on-demand content. They're not going back to a regularly scheduled weekly program on linear television. If you canceled your cable subscription during the pandemic, you ain't getting your cable subscription back unless you're just a real big diehard sports fan, and that's the only way you can consume sports content. And Amazon's coming for you and is going to be, that they're in the boardrooms of every major sports league having a conversation about how they can broadcast going forward. And the NFL would be crazy not to be at least entertaining those conversations because that's where all the next generation's eyeballs are. So I think that's what really has happened is the pandemic has moved that needle forward where we figured these conversations would be starting 5 years from now. They went into overdrive during the pandemic and knocked over a lot of those roadblocks that we still had to overcome to get the general public on board with understanding that gaming has value, is where your kids are watching stuff, is where the next generation with money to spend on brands is going to be. If you want to talk to them, they're on Twitch, they're on YouTube, you got to go to them.
And there's that real life engagement, right? Like there's that opportunity to actually talk to the chat, right? That's my favorite thing. I've done a live stream with a buddy of mine on the NBA fantasy and betting space every single day for the last couple months. And it's everybody in the chat talking shit to them and they're talking shit back and we're having a conversation. There's that real life engagement that I think, that you're obviously not going to get with TV or movie stars. Right. And I think that is so huge, especially for kids. Right.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is going to also be really interesting for the traditional sports space is during the pandemic, we've seen a number of sports figures, Austin Eckler being one of the most prominent, launch their own Twitch channels and start to directly connect with their fans, not having to go through, an autograph line or, stand, be mobbed on the street or only connect with them by being interviewed by the press in a game. He can get his personal brand out there, his message directly to the people that like him, grow his own brand under his own control in a way that sports figures could never have done outside of the era of social media and streaming. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that going forward. I don't think we're going to regress on that as brands also recognize this guy not only can be in my commercial that goes on TV, but he's got his own brand and his own followers, and the level of engagement that you have as a brand with a sponsor, as with a sponsorship with a streamer, the level of engagement there is so much higher than with a passive commercial on TV and you can generally do it for cheaper because you're going to one person rather than doing a big media buy. The value there is astronomical.
Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of positives to that. And as we've seen recently, there's actually some negatives to it as well. So you really have to pay attention to what you say on stream, kids. Don't be stupid. We just had Myers Leonard say some dumb shit on the internet, which is not good. Back in the beginning, we'll call it, of the pandemic, Blake Snell was coming out and he was pretty much kind of giving us an insight to what the hell was happening with the Major League Baseball labor negotiations, which was really, really interesting. And it turns out the MLB is just a bunch of, old dudes that suck. So that is what it is. Last thing I want to talk about here, and, hopefully you do have a couple minutes, because I kind of feel like an ass if we cut this part short, but women in esports, I think is something that is gaining a lot of steam. I know a lot of people, again, going over to our friends at eFuse, they have women of the arena that they do on a weekly or a monthly basis. I apologize, I don't remember exactly what it is, but they're always trying to make sure that girls and women are really becoming part of esports and streaming. What have you seen? I know you've written some pieces on it. I can even potentially put some of those down below in the show notes as well. But what have you seen on that end, and how much women in esports and gaming has grown, especially over your 3 years in the space, and the positives that are coming from just diversification and new ways of thinking, and guys just not totally being assholes all the time? Like, what have you seen on that end?
That is, for me, the most exciting thing about esports for the long term. Is there is no physical barrier in esports. Women getting into the National Football League is an entirely separate conversation that's very difficult to have and has a lot of nuance to it. Anyone can click on heads in Counter-Strike. It doesn't matter. You don't need to have a certain muscular structure to you. You can be 300 pounds, you can be 100 pounds, you can be male or female, it does not matter. So all of those barriers are gone. So what that means is the only thing we have to do is remove the cultural barriers. And there's a lot of work, obviously, to be done with that. The harm of video games are for boys that started in the 80s is long lasting and is going to take a lot of work to undo. But it's already starting, and it's getting more and more exciting because there are just a lot of women that play video games. That we know the demographics, we know the numbers. It's continuing to grow. There are more women that play games than you think there are, and there are some incredibly talented women that are competing at some of the highest levels. One of the best Rainbow Six teams in the world is a co-ed team that has a woman on it that is competing at the highest level. They're Cloud9, one of the big North American esports organizations, signed an all-women Valorant team that is competing alongside all of the male-dominated teams at the professional level. There's a lot of investment at the college level in getting women more interested in esports and providing spaces that are safe from the toxicity of voice chats. Because as we all know, the anonymity of the internet has allowed people the excuse to say truly horrific things to women. And that certainly exists in gaming. I don't think it's unique to gaming. I think it is uniquely difficult to deal with in gaming because there is so much anonymity on your screen name in a random video game that you're just on a voice call to play, or being able to type horrific things to somebody. So full credit to the women that are paving the way and enduring the things that they have to endure. But I think one thing that is being invested in right now, and a lot of credit goes to Riot Games, who's been in the news for a lot of problematic things that their company culture has had with treatment of women, but their esports division is certainly stepping up to create and invest in women's esports in a way that we've already seen create new teams. And there was a great story this week. Valorant had a big women's only tournament with a $50,000 prize pool.
Hell yeah.
And Cloud9 won it because they're the best women's team, and they have the investment of a coach and all the resources of a professional team that most women's teams don't have. The runner-up team was a team named Moon Raccoons because they just wanted esports team names are the best. It's just true. And I saw on Twitter a guy whose young daughter, who plays Valorant a little bit on the side, watched and saw that this team of 5 women was doing incredible things, had a funny team name, and now she wants to be a professional esports player. And, we're seeing the same things that happened with when women broke barriers in American Ninja Warrior, and we saw a massive surge of women getting into CrossFit and ninja style athletics. We're seeing the same things start to happen with esports and the women that are paving the way there. So there's a ton of work left to do, but it's an opportunity not only, morally of creating more diversity, but from a business perspective, there's so much opportunity as more women get into the space and it becomes a safer space for women that I'm extremely excited to see develop.
Right. Like the more diversity, like there's multiple millions, maybe not millions, that's excessive. There's a lot of studies that say the more diverse a group of people is, the better the outcome comes, whatever you're trying to get to. Right. And so I think it's really important. And I think it's fantastic that women are starting to kind of break that barrier of video games are for guys. It's kind of a dumb one. And as you said, like, it doesn't matter about your body structure. It doesn't matter. Like, as you said, anybody can click on heads, which I think is an awesome quote, by the way. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Like, who cares what you look like or who you are? And it doesn't matter. And I think it's only positive things can come from it. But yeah, to all the people on the internet that just say mean things, stop it. Like, I don't know, man. Like, that part of the internet just confuses the hell out of me. I hate it. I think it's ridiculous. People are just the worst. And I don't get it, man. I don't get it. It's ridiculous. Just stop being an asshole. I think that's as easy as it is. But Trent, I've had you for a long time. This has been absolutely fantastic. Sincerely appreciate your time. Trent, where can everybody find some of your work, find you on the internet, maybe engage with you a little bit? Do you have what's your Twitch handle, stream handle? I don't know what the hell it's called. Whatever. Tell me where we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of my content is on the esportsobserver.com and the Esports Observer. I do a column on Fridays with my opinion content, which is where you can find things like the storylines for Hollywood movies and those sorts of things. And you can find me on Twitter at Trent_esports. Happy to chat with anybody there. That's probably the best place that you'll find me. And yeah, really enjoyed chatting with you. I can always talk for hours about esports and how exciting the space is. And it's only going to keep getting more amazing.
Can't wait, man. Sincerely appreciate your time. You can find me at Michael Rasile 1. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, because that's where I do most of my damage. But I hope you all make thank you again to Trent one more time. I'll put all of that information that he said, we'll put it down in the show notes so you can check that out. But sincerely appreciate your time today, Trent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.